ever feel like you're doing all the glute exercises online, but you still don't know which part of your glutes you're actually targeting? You don't know which exercise you specifically should be doing so that you can get your glutes to look the way you want it to look. And this is exactly why I'm creating this series, From Flat to Lifted, Glutes Building 101. Because when it comes to building your glutes, it's more than just throwing together a bunch of glute exercises and calling it a leg day. You need to know specifically which exercises you should be doing so that you can shape your glutes the way you want it to look. I'm gonna break that all down in this series so that you guys know how to create the perfect leg day for you. So let's get into it. The first thing we need to talk about, which is probably one of the most important things, is the anatomy of the glutes, because it's so important for you guys to understand the different muscles so you know which muscles you should be targeting. The glutes has three muscles: the gluteus maximus, the gluteus medius, and the gluteus minimus. But it's commonly grouped into two groups, which is the lower glutes and the upper glutes. The lower glutes is the gluteus maximus, and the upper glutes consist of the gluteus medius and minimus. For this part one, we're going to be talking about the lower glutes. So whenever you're targeting the lower glutes, the shape that you're going to get is a more lifted look and a little bit of a more rounded look as well. So think of like a Brazilian butt lift. So now that we know what the lower glutes is and how it shapes your glute whenever you target that muscle, let's talk about how to know when an exercise is working your lower glutes, because that can be really confusing. So there are three main movements that target the lower glutes. The first movement is knee flexion, which basically means just bending of your knee. So think of squats, when you bend your knees and you get all the way down close to the floor. Think of lunges, you're bending your knee, getting all the way down close to the floor. Think of step ups, you're bending that working knee, getting your back foot all the way down to the floor. In all of these exercises, as you are bending your knee and bringing your body down close to the floor, that lower part of your glutes is stretching. And this is why it's so important that when you guys do these knee bending exercises, it's so important to get as low as possible to the floor, because the lower you get, the more stretch you're gonna get in your glutes. And the more that you're able to have your glutes stretch with that load, so the weight on top of the glutes, the bigger you're going to build your glutes. This is why it's so important that I tell all my clients, actually, you don't need to squeeze your butt at the top. You just want to focus on getting your butt as low as you possibly can, because that bottom position, when your glutes is stretched and you have the weight on top of your glutes, that is what is going to build your glutes. It's not you squeezing your glutes at the top. And something that you can do to really feel that lower part of your glutes stretching is do a squat with no weights, okay? And then place your hand at the bottom part of your glutes where the lower glutes is. Go all the way down, bending your knee. You are going to feel that part of your glutes literally stretching. Now, another key tip to get more lower glute engagement when doing these knee bending exercises is that as you're coming up from the floor, so in that bottom position where your knees are bended, you're trying to come up to extend your knees out straight. You want to push through the heel of your feet. I'm sure you guys heard this so many times already online, that when you're coming up from your squats, push through your heels. When you're coming up from a lunge, Bulgarian split squat, step up, push through your heels, drive through your heels. This is really going to help engage that lower glute muscle. This doesn't mean that you want to lift your toes off of the floor. You still want to keep your toes and your heels down flat on the floor, but you want to think of really pushing down into the heel of your feet into the floor as you are coming up from that bottom position of your squat, your lunge, Bulgarian split squat, step up. Now, the second major movement that targets the lower glutes is hinging at the hips, which basically just means pushing your butt all the way back. So I want you guys to think of exercises like RDLs, good morning, kettlebell swings, cable pull throughs. All of these exercises, you have to push your butt all the way back. And when you are hinging at the hips, you literally feel the stretch of your lower glutes all the way down to the hamstrings. Because in order for you to do that hinging motion, your hamstrings and that lower part of your glutes needs to be operated. It needs to be worked. I know a common issue that a lot of people have with RDLs is that they feel it only in their hamstrings. They don't feel it in that lower part of their glutes. And that's because you're keeping your legs way too straight. So whenever you're doing a hinged motion where you're pushing your hips back, your hamstrings is really taking over that movement. But whenever you start bending of the knee, that is when you're taking away some of the engagement from the hamstrings and you start to target more of that lower part of your glutes where your glutes connect to the hamstring. So this is why it's so important that when you do your RDLs, you have a slight bend in your knee so that you get the lower glutes and the hamstrings engaged. Now, if you're someone who feels your lower back whenever you're doing your RDLs, first of all, this is super common, okay? A lot of people, especially at the beginning, don't know how to do an RDL. Like, I think maybe 3 3% of my clients with my one-on-one coaching know how to properly do an RDL at the beginning of their coaching. So you're not alone. But 2 things you guys can do to perfect your RDL so that you're not feeling it in your lower back and you start to feel it in your lower glutes and your hamstrings. The first thing is standing in front of a wall. So you want to stand up against a wall, and you want to step 1 foot in front of the wall. Now, all you're going to do is just push your butt all the way back until your butt touches the wall. Once you can do that consistently, then step a little bit further away from the wall and push your butt all the way back again. This is really gonna help you get the mindset of hinging, because often when you're feeling your lower back, it's because you're just dropping your chest to the floor and not actually pushing your butt back. So when you're just dropping your chest to the floor, it's the lower back that's actually carrying out the movement, which is why your lower back is hurting you. So by practicing in front of a wall, it's going to make sure that you're actually hinging at your hips, because you have to get your butt to touch the wall. Your butt's not gonna touch the wall unless you're pushing your butt back, right? The next way you guys can do it is by doing a kneeling single leg RDL. So by doing it this way, it really allows you, one, to work one glute at a time. So this is key, especially if you're someone who has a muscle imbalance. One glute is stronger or bigger than the other. And by kneeling down on the bench with one knee and having one leg working, I've noticed that a lot of my clients are able to hinge at their hips easier this way than with both feet flat on the floor, working both glutes at the same time. Now, the third major movement that targets the lower glutes is the hip thrust / glute bridges thrust movement. Now, this pretty much is like 2 exercises, but there's so many different variations that you guys can do with these exercises. Single leg hip thrust, calf bridges, glute bridges, pulses, V stands, there's a ton. But the whole point of this is that this exercise targets the lower glutes, okay? So the middle all the way down to that lower part. And for a lot of people, they feel their glutes the most whenever they do these exercises. It's not that much of a problem for them. Whereas for an exercise like lunges, people struggle with feeling their glutes. One thing I would suggest, if you are someone that struggles feeling your glutes with lunges, I should have mentioned this earlier, but I'm gonna mention it right now. You wanna do a deficit, which means that you are going beyond your range of motion. So how you do that is by elevating that working leg. So the leg that's in front, you can put a plate, you can put a step board, you can put something that's stable enough to place your foot entirely on top of. And once you're elevated higher up off the floor, you're gonna realize that you can get lower into that lunge. And so by getting lower into that lunge, as we spoke about, you're gonna get a deeper stretch, which is gonna build your glutes more, and it's gonna make you feel your lower glutes a lot more. But back to the hip thrust. With hip thrust, as I mentioned, a lot of people, they feel this in their glutes. If you're someone that struggles with feeling even hip thrust in your glutes, I would recommend doing glute bridges first, because what glute bridges does is that it actually takes away from the hamstrings and quads working. With hip thrust, because you're elevating your back up off the floor, your glutes is working. That is a primary muscle, but it's also your quads and hamstrings being worked to bring your hips down and up to the floor. So with a lot of people, if they do just glute bridges, fully extending the hips up, they are feeling their glutes fire up a lot. Now, what you also can do to feel your glutes when doing hip thrust is you can use the resistant band, because what's going to happen is by placing the bands around the thighs, you have to push your knees out against that resistance, which is going to engage your glutes even more. And then a third thing is you can do a glute activation exercise before starting your actual leg day, which will fire up your glutes. And then you can go into doing your hip thrust and all your glute exercises. And often people tend to feel their glutes a lot more because they just fire them up through that activation. Now with the hip thrust, you're gonna feel a stretch of your glutes as you bring your butt down to the floor. Kind of like with a squat, lunge, Bulgarian split squats, as you spoke about, your glutes is stretching the most as you go all the way down. And as you come up, fully extending the hips at the top, squeezing your glutes at the top. This is when you want to squeeze your glutes, okay? I said it for squats, you don't got to squeeze at the top, but for hip thrust, you want to squeeze your glutes at the top. And just like I mentioned with the squats, as you bring your butt up to the top, right? So you're fully extending the hips, you want to drive through the heels. This doesn't mean keeping your toes up off the floor. Toes are still down flat on the floor, but you're pushing through the heel of your feet to bring your butt and that weight all the way up to the ceiling as much as possible, making sure that you're fully locking out your hips. So this means from your shoulders all the way to your knees, there should be somewhat of a straight line. So now that you guys know the 3 major movements that target the lower glutes, how do you put that into a leg day? So what you guys want to do is you want to do at least 3 exercises to 6 exercises that target the lower glutes. So that means you should be taking an exercise from each of these movements into each leg day. So you want to have a thrust movement, a hinge movement, and a knee flexion movement. Now, if you are still unsure, like, okay, but which one out of the 3 movements should I put into my leg day? How many reps, how many sets, how much weight should I be doing? How long should I be resting in between sets? Because all of these things are so important and key when it comes to building your glutes. I can help you with my one-on-one online coaching, where I literally give you all that information, including a meal plan, because you need to make sure that you are feeding your glutes to grow your glutes. And you guys also will get one-on-one weekly calls with me every single week, because I need to make sure that you are staying on track and I need to hold you accountable to that. So if that's something that you're interested in doing, you can sign up by booking your call with one of the links in either corner. I'm not too sure where it's going to be, and we can talk and see if it's a good fit for you. Now, what if you also want to target the top part of your glutes? Like, what if you want your glutes to not only lift from the bottom, but you also want your glutes to poke out from the side when you turn around? You know, when you're in a dress and it's like back, butt, legs, you need to be targeting the upper glutes. And that's what we're going to talk about in part 2. So make sure you guys are subscribed, notification bells turned on even, and I will see you guys on Wednesday for part 2. Bye.